Hello, my name is Monty from Montana, a strong, sober mind that likes to solve problems in order to help people. I have accepted Yeshua, the Son of God, into my heart as my personal Savior and Redeemer. My spiritual name is Nephi John, and my spiritual task is to waste and wear out my life to bring the truth out of the darkness. Welcome to my masterclass on the legend of Nephi. This is the second lecture, or whatever we're calling these. The first one was called Lehi is a spiritual name of the father of Nephi. That could be summarized in probably a 30-second clip. And I want to emphasize a few things from that lecture before getting into the concept of Shazer as a super word and possibly written as a word flower. Now, last time I introduced you to a wonderful resource, and we talked about Isaiah 42:15, going to the river islands, or rivers islands. I tried to look this up in the Great Isaiah Scroll, the Scroll of Qumran, sometimes referred to as some of the discoveries of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I don't know if it's because I'm in a different country, but Israel seems to have shut that website down. I tried to use a VPN from Israel, like pretending I'm inside of Israel, and it still didn't work. If you look at the Dead Sea Scroll, the Great Scroll of Isaiah, you'll notice it doesn't have a lot of the diacritics and all these extra symbols. Today we're going to see an example where the s is that s. We talked about that before. So one of them is sha, one of them is sa, and then there's another letter of the alphabet that's the s sound. Just tells you the language is broken. But when you look at language, you can look at ideas. So if I were to look at this, there's something about waste, mountains, and hills, and I looked up the word garbage, and there's different Hebrew words than what's used here. This word is the same word as desolation. Now that's interesting because the Book of Mormon uses the word desolation a lot. Is he talking about garbage dumps? Maybe, maybe not. Dry up all their herbs. Made me think of yerba mate, which is a holly tree or a shrub. You drink it in a bomba and a bombija, a metal straw. You share your spit by passing it around in a circle. At the beginning of my mission, we were allowed to do that, and then we could only drink mate cocido, which means we couldn't spit and share the spit with those sitting around the campfire or whatever. North America has the black, what did they call it? Similar thing, something about spitting in a pot, drinking the tea. Tonga has kava kava, might be also of the hollyberry family. I wonder where those trees came from. I wonder how they migrated. So we have 4 ideas here. Something about wastewater and hills, drying up the herbs, something about river islands, something about drying up pools. And the drying up thing looks like a parallelism because you could put that in a 4-line stanza and create poetry. You got dry up, dry up, dry up. So there might only be 2 main ideas. Something about hills and herbs and something associated with that about drying up. And that is coming from the Masoretic text, which means they had something in front of them that they were either copying or modifying. And then we generally have 2 other sources. We have the Samaritan text, which may be analogous to the lost 10 tribes, what they had before they left. And then we have the Septuagint. The Septuagint is older, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's more rigorous. So in this case, I guess I got to get rid of Yo Quiero Taco Bell. It says, I will give rivers to the islands and dry land. Do you see there's fewer things being discussed? So in this case, I would say they had less information. This is Isaiah. It's hard to understand. So maybe the Greeks kind of glossed over it. But now let me go to a different scripture. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. There's so many YouTube videos and TikTok videos on this topic. Remember, the cantillation marks would help with singing, with the vocalization of it. They have vowel points, and then they still have some of these dots, which I guess are called diacritics, to distinguish the language, because likely the alphabet had 30 characters or so, been reduced and lost over time, and the Masoretes do what they do. So we got Reset, and then the Batim or whatever in front of it, and so this is pronounced Brashet. And on TikTok or something, some beautiful black girl, evangelical, does this whole thing about the word Abrashet. If you add the alaf to the beginning of this, this is the alaf. So let's grab this, go over here. So this book is called Genesis for that reason. And now let me add completely different meaning. Okay? One letter added or subtracted, it changes the meaning. But then you got these erudites that know their grammar of Hebrew according to the scholars and the world, who've spent years and years debating different things, saying it means this thing when God created. Okay, so we've been in the beginning, we have Elohim, clearly plural. They've spun some yarn about how it means something not plural. They're justifying their monotheistic lens. Then they say Eloha becomes plural and is Elohim. Blah, blah, blah. It's like Charlie Brown, that teacher. Wah, 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 wah. From my understanding, Elohim is a plural form to mean those that came from above. We're not going to get an affirmament today, but it's a plural word. Heaven has an eem in it. It's a plural word. King James said it was singular. Et can mean and, it can mean other things. So ab et em would be ab, father, et, and, em, or probably pronounced am, like Emma, would be mother. Eris being earth. Okay, so in this case, we'll now take this and see if the ideas are the same. So now I've got Greek, detected it. It says, God gave to the sky and the earth. So, I don't know where they're getting that translation from. So let's decompose this. So there's definitely God there. So what are those two words? All of a sudden it's godhood. That's interesting. This word is archon. This word is God, theos. So it would read something like the archons and God. So now it's saying it's officiate, archon. I'm pretty sure that was archon. So now we got, just go with what it tells you. Something about officiating. What's weird about this thing is you mouse over it, it tells you the word, but it doesn't give you like the base definition. Like it should say that's God. We got tone. Interesting. So if I click through, It's giving me a lot of stuff. It's not telling me the basics of what it means. Thank you for that mouse over. No value whatsoever. Bring forth. So if you do like a word cloud, you can kind of get a sense for what the original meaning was. My point is, there's a reference to an archon here and a god here. And Joseph Smith clearly went down this path that Elohim somehow meant the plurals of God, but somehow meant the Father. He kind of had this fuzzy understanding, and because he's an unlearned man, it's really hard to understand what was going on in his study and his understanding. But if you look at his life, and you treat some of his desires in his life as Blue's Clues, he tried to learn Hebrew. He invited some guy. The guy fell through. He had bought the guy's books. It was way complex. To come to Nauvoo, to the school of the prophets, and teach. And then they found another guy that had a simpler version of Hebrew. Invited him. He decided to come for 6 weeks, so that means they paid him. They took a course. And I don't know if it was the first story or the second story, but in one of the stories, the guy shows up late, and Joseph's like, I'm going to use the spirit of prophecy and teach everybody. So they start a class. He goes like 30 minutes, and then everyone goes home. So your spirituality can only take you so far. You need to combine it with intellectual capacity. He received a participation certificate from the teacher after the course was over. Orson Pratt actually received a certificate of accomplishment. So since Joseph, whether directly or indirectly, was paying the bill, it doesn't surprise me he received a participation certificate. And then later we have the whole Egyptian thing. He wants to study Egyptian. They're doing this thing where they would write one Egyptian word, and they said that one word would mean a lot of stuff. And that's what I'm going to kind of introduce today here. So, so-called erudites that claim they know an understanding of Genesis chapter 1 should look at all available sources on it, not just because it's the earliest source, it's the best. You got to understand each source had some sort of capabilities as a scribe, had some sort of data in front of them, and from that created their version of the story, possibly based on their worldviews and wanting to communicate something. So Elohim is clearly a Masoretic construct, that God plural. And so in ancient Canaanite, we have a god named El, we have Baal, possibly Asherah. To the south, we have Jehovah. And then people are going to go off on tangents like, you can't say the name, it's the tetragram, or the name, or Lord, Adonai, or Yahweh. Do you see what's going on? It's just a comedy of errors. It's ridiculous. Jehovah is probably the closest example. You do enough binge watching on YouTube, Naaman Gordon, who is a Jew, studied about how in the mid-1200s, after the Masoretes, this tetragram, you can't say the name thing, was invented. It was a creation of man. God is too holy, we can't say his name. And so, true scholarship is looking for the truth wherever it will take you. And so, you can go in, and this is a great tool to start, just quickly pronounce it. Amar Elohim, Amar Haya, and it came to pass, remember? Or, light, or possibly Ur, which we'll find out in Egyptian is Uru, like the shining ones, the good guys. Haya again, and it came to pass, 1961. Or. And so what I'm saying is you have ways to take the language and go from one perspective to the other. But it's downright insulting for a so-called academic to say this could not be Abrachet. Now, why would I say that? Last time when I was introducing the Hebrew alphabet, there's currently 22 letters, and there's a psalm or something, 101, I forget which one. And therefore, there's 22 letters. This is absolutism. It couldn't have evolved over time. Somehow the P and the F are the same letter, but with a dot to determine if it's P or F. Very distinct sounds, both using the lips, one using the teeth. So when I'm sharing my ideas, I'm trying to share them that if you have reasonable intellect, you don't have to get caught up into these webs of language that these little microgroups create. And they're very good at what they do. They're specialists in their field. I would make that analogous to they're very good at staking the fish. When you cut a fish, you stake it and cut it in sections, or you can fillet the fish. So if I wanted to look at all possible language options related to the schwa sound, how could I do that? That would be filleting the fish. Or if I were to introduce the idea of, well, how would you pronounce that in Chinese? Someone studying Canaanite literature is going to say, that's not in my field. You're right, it's not in your field, because you're so focused on your lens that you get caught up into your echo chamber, into your worldview based on what you think you know. The world is a big place. If knowledge is about a flood all the way across the world in various cultures, couldn't there be knowledge about a god of thunder, which is Jehovah, in multiple places? Thor, the god of thunder and lightning. Is that right? Is my internet connected? Is it foibles? So anyway, there's a website where someone's actually taken the time to look at the sounds pronounced across all languages. And the idea that one culture doesn't have an L and another culture doesn't have an R, if you can play with your mouth as a child, you're going to create those sounds. So likely the lack of a common sound, so there could be mouth deformations, could be hard because the L is, your tongue is moving forward, the R, it's kind of rolling back on the mouth, on the top of your mouth. So maybe there could be some explanation for it, but more than likely it's probably a cultural reason. He that cannot be pronounced, the letter L can't be pronounced because, and there could be some cultural reason. I think it's the inventories tab. Yeah, this is, no. Segments. There it is. I'm putting on the bookmarks. You can later see it. So across all languages, 96% of languages, not technically all languages, there's a M sound. So I was listening to someone the other day that was explaining, Sadhguru was explaining, when you do the meditation, the classic meditation where you put your finger in your thumb, you sit with your hands on your knees, and you say, Om. I've listened to him do that in one of his little workshops, and it sounded like he was saying a deep Om. But he recently posted an article that says it should be 3 sounds. Ah, oo, which, if you see here, ah, oo, are 3 of the primal sounds across all religions. So it's technically Aum. So you're actually exercising your mouth because it's going in 3 directions to make those 3 sounds. Now, he probably changed his mind. He just didn't want to tell people his ideas were evolving, because it was clearly a deep Om. And And then he does this small YouTube video to say, no, it's aum. So maybe he gained additional light and knowledge, but he's a little bit erudite in his desire to maintain a certain brand and position. So then we get these funny characters that make it very difficult to understand what that sound is. Then sometimes they put two characters together and say that's a sound. And I've built my own sound map that's a simple circle that captures most of these sounds. And then you can see we're falling off into strange sounds. But here's an example of a sound that's in Amharic, kwa, kwa. And there should be a similar one that would be GW. This might be the Guarani sound. This might be the Guarani sound. And so think about this. Then I go read an older, there's the Gua. Then I go read an older dictionary and they have a different sound map. So for example, if I were to say, the cat sat on the mat, and I were to write those words down, how would Joseph Smith say those? If I go to the 1828 dictionary, would he say, the cat? So notice this is a really strange, out of bounds A sound. Or would he say, the cot, like the British do? The cot sat on the mat. And I'm not being offensive to anyone. I'm a generalist here. So I might not be precise. Some British person may come back and say, no, we say it this way. I just think of that Ebenezer Scrooge movie where they're playing the minister's cat. And they're saying the minister's cat, and then they say words with that softer A, that British A. But shouldn't the word cat also be that soft A? So if you're trying to understand language, you need to understand that language means tongue. It comes from sounds. Then at some point they want to take those sounds and etch them on paper or oracle bones or the shoulder bone of a cow to commemorate or to say something, or on rocks or on clay or on gold plates, whatever. The writing system is a function of the language, and the language is a function of the mouth, the phonetics, what is said. So anyway, the Hebrew alphabet, I showed one example. If you compare different interpretations, Aleph is generally considered the first letter. How do we even know the order of the alphabet? And so the Greek rendition of Yeshua saying, I am the Alpha and Omega, if we were to trust this alphabet, would be him saying, I am the Aleph and the Tav. Cross sticks, possibly a cross symbol. You'll remember I used one of these others and they went down this path that this meant goat. So he could have said, I am the ox and the goat. And then I emphasized that the middle letter was probably water. Now look at this. Water is about chaos and blood. Now why did I say that? Because at one point in my life I gave a lesson on 3rd Nephi, come to me that I may heal you. And this was a long time ago and I didn't have nearly the knowledge and research that I've put in now. And I kind of walked through that if you put Aleph and M and Tav together, you get a word, truth. So when Yeshua says, I am the way, the life, and the truth, he may have been spelling it out and saying, I am the ox head, the water and the blood, and the cross. I am the Aleph and the Tav. Gives a very different meaning. And the other reason I want to mention that is a lot of people want to put archetypes or mysticism or something different to these ancient languages. I like this person's website. He's not very well trained in the official erudite form of ancient Hebrew. But if you watch a few of his videos, he makes it very clear, and my personal study aligns with this understanding, that these symbols and these language were very concrete. And 10 years ago, I didn't really have a concept of what that meant. But since I've been part of a Russian family, I now have a better sense of what concrete means. There's something exact about someone saying, I am the ox head, the water, chaos, mighty blood, whatever that means, and I am the cross sticks. Or someone saying, I am the seed. Very concrete. They don't have hang-ups on sexuality, everything's agrarian or pastoral. It's about food and animals. They certainly know what the inside female organs of an animal looks like because they're slaughtering the animals, observing what they see. They're not afraid of saying those are breasts, whereas some people are, and say, oh, those are two front teeth. So now we got sha or s, can be either sound, but then up here we got s, and up here we got s. And we're supposed to mean this is some coherent language. No, it's a broken language. So as we move forward, we need to understand that. So I suggested abrachet, I lost that, is a super word. And I watched this TikTok video and this beautiful African girl gives this evangelical talk. Ab means father, reshet means this, brachet means beginning. So you can do this word play where you use different subcomponents of the word. Shet means shittim tree, the acacia tree. So she said, Jesus is in this. And then you get some erudite like Dan McClellan coming on and saying, no, that's not right. He doesn't refer to the other two versions. He doesn't refer to the possibility that it could be right, because in his study, in his worldview, in his echo chamber, it's not right. But the first letter of the alphabet is abrachet. If you're going to write a book called Genesis, the beginning, wouldn't you use the aleph and the tav in the first word? Or at least in the first word and the last word? No, we don't have poetry here. We don't have this possibility. And so that's going to be the problem when we talk about Shazer today. So with Shazer, when I think of Shazer, the primary thought is the garden of birth. And in ancient America and in other societies, it was very common for a woman to go into a garden, squat, have her child, and then eventually grow food there, where the placenta and all this other water fluids and other things existed. So I would think that was the main idea, but I think there's something about snow, something about umbilical cord, which comes out with twisting, something about almonds, and I think that's enough. I think that's going to give us an idea. Now, this was just an intuition I had. Where this idea came from, I don't know exactly. And so the closest thing Hugh Nibley could come up with was Shazer, means groves of trees in Arabic. It probably is tied to trees. But notice I'm talking about a specific tree, an almond tree. So now, where do I get garden of birth from? Shah, in an Egyptian dictionary, means garden. Zerah, in a Hebrew concordance, means birth. And for those of you that want to have a little lesson, the question is, could you find the meaning of Zarahemla, which might have been Zerah Kemla, where it's that H dot. The H with the dot under it, which is... Now imagine you actually had that sound and then you are trying to create a language that lots of different people of different nationalities and tribes and old languages have. You're going to simplify the language, make it easier to pronounce. So the evolution of your language, if it becomes a lingua franca of many different native speakers of different languages, you would simplify the common language. So what tools can we use to accomplish this? So if you want to start to unlock the mysteries of the universe, you have to start reading dictionaries. So I could go back here and I could show you how I got the answer, but this isn't how I arrived there. So the word snow has these things, apparently nothing related to Shazer. Let's click on one of those. Shalag. Do you understand what I'm saying? Shazer or Shazar is the primary theme, but if it's a word flower, that maybe the Shah is really big. What is the symbol of a Shah? The breasts of a woman. And then as a word flower, you could have Zer being the primary trunk, and then you could have all these other elements into a flower or a tree.
Strong's H 7949, Shalag, Gesenius Lexicon, Sheleg.
Okay, so I didn't find umbilical cord twisting, so I'd have to look deeper. Guess what? It's going to have that Shah sound. How about almond? So Moses has some event with his brother Aaron that some dead branch grows olive or almond blossoms and then actually creates the almond fruit. So again, if I don't understand what they're talking about, this could be sakkad. I'm like, oh, I don't know which sound that is. The language is broken. Now we have Shah. So again, I could make the Shah symbol, and by the Shah symbol, I mean the Proto-Hebraic, which would be the picture of woman's breast, and have all these subwords around it, this circular flower. And it could explain and symbolize a lot.
Shaked.
And my original intuition wasn't based on this. I've just now understood that. So you could dig into Blue Letter Bible, but the data needs to be organized in a different relational form to make this possible. It needs to have a different key mechanism. So like if I search for the word and, you're going to see all sorts of words, and one of them is our E from last time. And so I can't search on this side in Blue Letter Bible. So to do so, I need a different concordance tool. So this is the best one I've found and used. So here I actually search for it. So let me search for Zerah or Zer. And so I just spent a lot of time reading the dictionary. But every time you see it again, so this Abiezeri, remember we have Zizram, might be tied to it, might not be. I'm not worried about it. But I'm being forced to scan this because of the current data that I have available to me. So I kind of want to get to the place where the Z's are over here and start the word. So maybe I could go backwards. But it's useful to flash all of this in front of your eyes. Your brain is actually processing it. So this is interesting because I'm seeing Zarahemla there. There's a G in the front, which throws that off. Look what it says, not inhabited. So it's just a data point. I'm looking for the gua sound in both Egyptian and Hebrew. I can't find it. So when I see stuff like that, I stop. So we're looking for, something about Zer being a crown. the garden of the crown, an endowment, because the location matters. Oh, it means the opposite. It means loathsome, disgusting. Well, does childbirth have a component that has that in it? Zerak, the rising of the light. Interesting. I would have put kumora as the word for the rising of the light. So then when you go back and you look at the words, you have to have some anchor of what's more accurate. The general magnet is things closer to Isaiah are more accurate. Isaiah being the most, Ezekiel maybe, Jeremiah maybe, some of the Proverbs and Psalms maybe, because no one understood Isaiah, so they're just writing it down. And it's the closest language that hasn't been influenced by later scribes, the Deuteronomists and all that other stuff. And so if I were to look up a word, so I'm going to say kumora means the same thing as that. So then I would go look where the word is, and I always try to go to Isaiah first and then use that as kind of a magnet to see where things are. So now we got the Zerubbabel, so we're kind of right in this Zer root. The foreleg, the shoulder. So I haven't seen that before. So we got this twisting tied to the umbilical cord. Now we got this. Might have been a difficult birth. Zarzif, a flowing. So do you see how Shah and now Zer both have these important things? So what is the fundamental symbol for Zer would be interesting, because the Shah is the breast. What is the Zer? Now imagine you put those two symbols really large on a piece of paper, and then from each of them you drew these radiant subwords, and you have a super word, just like abreshet. Tightly girt. The rising. In Spanish, to give birth is dar la luz, to give the light. Well, you're not formally studying this. You're just glancing over things. Oh, now we have a flowing of water or gushing of water. Is that tied to the birth of a child? And some of this I'm learning right here on the fly. Like, I haven't seen some of this again. I know what it's about. This would be my primary root, Zerah, the child, fruitful seed time. You can't know that Jacob was born 5 days after they left into the... Yes, I can. I've studied Shazer. So later when Jacob is saying, and it's been 65 years since we left Jerusalem, that's code for, I just had my 65th birthday. I'm in my 66th year. So this is an example of the importance of digging deeply into the Book of Mormon. I struggle with Hugh Nibley because I've read most of those books. I knew of his Shazer being the Garden Grove. And was he really not looking? Like, this isn't hard. So I wonder if I found umbilical this way. Let's search for cord. Oh, that's going to say that at the top of every page. Worthless. So the birth cord, what is it called? It's got a Shah or a Zer in it. So when I thought about how I was going to do this presentation today, I was focused on Shah. And what I learned by articulating, by verbalizing, is the other half. So you have to learn how to read dictionaries if you want to figure out some stuff. So a nice lesson would be for those that are interested in the historicity argument. The Guarani, I don't know if it's 1540, 1640 probably. It's called the Vocabulario. Ruiz is the author, and you will find two places where Moroni, one is in reference to a virtuous or virgin man, so you have to read Spanish to be able to find that one. And the other is reference to a warrior. So what Joseph Smith had access to that dictionary, and he knew, and that's why he made up. So do you understand the historicity arguments? They're all ridiculous because they're just going to move the goalpost. But this is a good exercise, and what I'm trying to emphasize is as we try to move forward with our understanding of things, if we could relationalize this data, OCR it, manually transcribe it, and I've built an interface to do that with the 1828 dictionary, which is lacking in its original OCR, which I used to develop the first dictionary. Then we could capture and do these cross searches. So this is just a mathematical map. Shazer. And so maybe I will go to the almond. Let's go back to the almond because some of the insights here are quite nice. Shakad, cups shaped like almond blossoms. They had date palms in the temple. They had references to the almond and the pomegranate in the temple, the first temple, the temple of Jehovah that builded Solomon. And then if you look at its original form, we've got shaked, which is the almond tree, and this is an interesting thing. It's one of the first trees to blossom. So when I first arrived at this, I didn't arrive at it intellectually. I had this concept that was similar to that primary song of popcorn popping on an apricot tree. And then if I were to search for where is Almond Mountain in Arabia? Oh, it's called Almond Mountain. And if you do some research, there's a group of evangelicals that have put forth a lot of evidence that this is what we would call the true Sinai. Sinai means the burning bush. And so when we get into talking about different things about Nephi, this is all important. So the Romans, Constantine says, we're going to Romanize Christianity. Hey, let me send my mom on this tour of the Holy Land. So she goes to Jerusalem and supposedly collects some of the wood fragments of the cross. Then she goes to what we today call the Sinai Peninsula and asks her guide, well, which mountain's the highest? Oh, that one. We'll call that one after me. Let's call that one St. Helen. I think her name was Helen. Which one's the second highest? Oh, that one. We'll call that one Sinai. Okay? So you believe Mount Sinai is on the Sinai Peninsula, and you use that word Sinai because some woman went on some Roman Catholic introduction tour to the Holy Land, and she claimed it to be so. That is not intellectual. That is not scholarly. That is absurd. And so when you read about the true Sinai on YouTube, you're going to realize that some of the things these explorers were discovering is out there. But I've watched the videos and I've gleaned lots of knowledge. I'm not drinking all of the Kool-Aid of that person's worldview, but they're offering something innovative that I need to try on. So if you draw a picture from the Gulf of Aqaba to or Eliat, and draw a straight line from there to the Mount of Olives on that path, you're going to find a place that the Arabs today called the Split Rock of Moses. And when Nephi confronts his brothers and they have these conversations, these discussions, we don't know if they were contentious. It might have just been their form of communicating. Nephi uses a logic frame of knowing. I know this. I know that you know Moses crossed right here. That's because on the beaches where they're hanging out and just taking time, Solomon had put a post on the opposite side of Jumena, or whatever the crossing was, that said, this is where Moses crossed. So Nephi's hanging out with his brothers on the beach. They see the symbol. That's a data point. So when he later tries to create a discussion or have an argument with them, whatever language you want to use to describe their conversations, he says several times, I know that you know these things. Because as brothers, they've had shared experiences where they have both seen it with their eyes as witnesses. Very concrete definition of know. It's not, I philosophize about it. I'm telling my brother, I know this happened because you and I experienced it together. Okay, so we have to learn to read dictionaries. Every time you switch languages, it seems like the scripts are changing, but that can be decomposed to a sound. So I was talking to a friend of mine from Egypt, and I brought up this whole Shazer thing, not in context of religion or anything. She says, yeah, that means grove of trees in Arabic. Okay, so where are we? So we had that. Are there any other elements? The Egyptian dictionary. So let's see if we can find Shah in the Egyptian dictionary. And then erudites are going to say, well, you have to go out and spend thousands of dollars to buy these dictionaries because they're the latest and greatest and they're updated. And the old Budge dictionary is not very good. It was one of the first curated dictionaries that has the least influence of the philosophies of men in the curation. There's a lot of curation going on with Egyptian from the get-go. The French had a bunch of information, took it, went back and created this French Republic for a short amount of time, had the Egyptian calendar built into their government system, and then Napoleon came in, lost a war to the English. The English stole the Rosetta Stone because they won the war, spoils of war. And then there was this competing Young versus Champollion, trying to decipher the language. The Rosetta Stone was a clue, but it's a small clue. That there are super words and word flowers like Shazer. So imagine how Nephi's writing this, etching this into metal. And then all of a sudden he would write, and there would be this big empty space in the middle of the page that was this word flower. Breasts on the left, whatever Zer symbol would be. So this is the Yod. Oh, did I lose that? That was the Yod in Hebrew, but they got rid of its primary meaning, which is phallus, and they said it's just the hand. When you look at the titles, you have to read the beginnings about pronunciation, just like the 1828 dictionary. Is it the cot sat on the mat? When I read the introduction of the 1828 dictionary about pronunciation, it's not clear to me. And that's a problem with someone writing in 1828. They're going to be like, you know how to pronounce this. So this guy goes through, so this is called the Budge Dictionary. He curates a bunch of things. I found Ramiumptum in here. I went to the primary source where he cited it. I couldn't find it in there. And Ramiumptum, Rahu Uhim, or Uhim Ra, depending on the order, means to repeat yourself over and over and over again, kind of like conference talks. So it's kind of ironic that Gordon built a Ramiumptum. And so we can look at all sorts of words. There's not a lot of sha words, but the order of the dictionary, it's hard, and it's easier to do on a phone because the web browser is not as easy to scroll and kind of scan and see some things. So as a master class, I'm giving you tools for you to do your own research. For example, I suggested finding Moroni in a Guarani dictionary. Somewhere I have a text document that has the page number of it. But so what? I found it. You can find it. Does it matter that I find it right now? And that's not the purpose of a master class. So if you haven't attended kind of higher order classes at university, you might be a little overwhelmed with the nature of this. This is me sharing my understanding of how I'm arriving at solutions, somewhat of an apprentice model, and giving you enough clues to let you go and find your own way based on your own skills and gifts. So this will come up soon. Ari means the keeper of, the worker of. So Nephi is the good one. So modern Egyptologists dropped the vowels altogether. Apparently they were guessing at the vowels based on the Demotic or spoken Coptic language. So Ari in Egyptian means to do things. Nephi is the great doer, so he's the great Ari. So when we look at ancient America and we look at names of towns that are from very different tribes that have the word Ari, you're like, what the heck is that? And then the overseer of the stewards, so the Ari is kind of the task to be performed by the workers. If it has a T at the end in Hebrew or in Egyptian, it's normally feminine. So if it ends with a T, it's feminine. And then Aru, the U ending, generally means the people that are doing it. So imagine you're Columbus or Cristobal Colon, and you go up to some people and you go, "C'est quoi?" which is French for what is that? ¿Qué es esto? And you're pointing at a guy in a boat, rowing the boat, and they answer, canoe. Do you misinterpret which thing it is? Is it the boat? Is it the man in the boat? Is it the paddle? What is it? So in Egyptian, the U would be a marker. It's the person. So if I were to look in this Egyptian dictionary, sure enough, you will find canoe. And it's not canoa, it's canoe. It's the paddler of the boat, the one doing the work. Arichet, to make a speech. Arishen, to dress one's hair. Arikat, the doer of the splendid works, which we'll get to later. Arit is the work, and it's man-made. So if you're a man or a woman doing one of these things, so then if I find a city in ancient America called Aripuana, and I look it up, the keeper of clay or bricks, Anna. So again, I'm mixing Hebrew that I have available to me from the King James, the Masoretic, whatever you want to say there, the Bible Hebrew that I have, and I'm merging that with some of these Egyptian words to come up with new words. Why am I doing that? Because then it explains why there's two places in South America called Aripuana. These are the two places where they probably had clay they could just dig out of the river. They probably would burn them in a furnace and make the pots for the society and exchange goods and services on boats. And that's where I was going with this. Ari is the keepers or workers, and Mer is the overlord. And if you read the introduction up here, when the guy says Mer with an E, it could have been more. Moroni. And I think Moroni is actually one of these words like Shazer that has multiple meanings. Moron could mean bitter water. The E ending in Hebrew is different than some of these endings, not super different. And moroni, mer, coming from the Egyptian, means the overlord. Mor. Oni in Hebrew means the navy. And so all these people that have these geographies. Can I find this quickly? I don't know if I can. Is that Shalah? So we're supposed to believe Shalah. Look, Shah again. That's why I stopped. To loose. To stretch out. Are these related? To shoot forth, to come out of the womb of a mother. And so, following that logic, the birth of Jacob would have been easy. I'm sorry, Jacob is obvious. Joseph. They get to southern Arabia. They arrive at a place called Salalah. Southern Arabia. I don't know if it's Salalah. It's technically, is that Yemen? Is that Yemen or Oman? It's interesting that some of these stories seem to happen on borders. There it is. Have a waterfall. So what's the word for waterfall? I still don't know. And I might be in the wrong country. There it is. Is that it? And some people are like, well, you're not very exact with your language. Well, language is not exact. So Salalah is also a Tongan, it's technically a Samoan word for the Tongan Samoa Wars. Salalah means comes destruction in their language. But when we get into the geography, there's a place in southern Arabia, waterfalls. Yeah, not in. So it's very odd to me that this is it Yemen? How this search is just utterly failing. Like I can pull up the maps that I've done before. But again, that's something that just came to me based on what we just found with the word, supposedly the word is and. And if you can't see Salalah there, so there's a waterfall in Bountiful that's never mentioned in the Book of Mormon, but it's mentioned. If you look at archaeology and geography, it's something about Salalah. So my current real-time estimation is this is where Joseph was born. And if we read carefully the text, maybe it said Joseph was born before Nephi rests in Salalah. I don't know that it does. And so this concept of these word flowers is fundamental to early language. Shazer. We did not find it in here yet. So Shah here means garden. I don't know that this is searchable. So let's see if I search for garden. Sometimes it's searchable, but you just have so many responses. So we have Shah right there. So look at it. Flat, some trees, it's a field garden, flood. So think about that play on words. You've got flood and you got a woman flooding the waters on the ground as she gives birth. And some of these early symbols are interesting because people that say the firmament's not real, it's like, why would different cultures talk about the firmament? And this computer is struggling tremendously. Brave does not like serving up large PDFs. How it holds it in memory, likely. So this is interesting. Shema means the south. Tema means the south when we get into some of the Isaiah prophecies. So maybe I'll finish there with another one of those. Have you read your Bible and understand its relationship to the Book of Mormon? How about Jeremiah 5? And so if you dig into the language and get at the root of the language, and so one of my specialties is called latent semantic analysis, where you create a bag of words of the language and you still get a fundamental idea of what's going on. And so that's kind of what I do here, is I say, well, these are the words, and if I were to put them in a different order, or if I didn't understand them as a scribe, what could they really be? It's really a fun game. It might be Jeremiah 2. So the easiest way to find it is Kedar. So Kedar may mean black, may be one of the sons of Ishmael. And you remember that story about the archers of Kedar mentioned in Isaiah that come to the rescue of Nephi or shoot arrows at Nephi? And why wouldn't Nephi include that in the story? Obviously because his father articulated it in detail. His children live in another country. That's the past. What does he teach his children in the plain and precious small plates has nothing to do with their struggles and their afflictions. So the word ki in Egyptian means the other one. So if I have a place called Arikat and a place right next to it called Arikipa, Arikat is the creator of the big works, the specialized clay, and Arikipa is the other clay. And Arupana is got this Ana thing, so maybe that determines who was the original creator. So what is Cheetham? It's the Mediterranean Sea. The islanders of the Mediterranean Sea. And then in the same verse, we have, it's not that verse, it's this one. In the same verse, we have Kedar. So if I were to put Cheetham on a map, Mediterranean Sea, let's just throw Sicily out there. Put Kedar on a map, where Abraham died, with his final 6 sons of Midian, the Midianites, the high priest Jethro, that whole story. So let's look at Kedar. So some people are saying, what? You can't put these pieces together. Why not? Oh, there was Salah again. I saw it. Send. So that would be interesting, that Shazer has a significance because that's a crossroads. That's where Moses went, Joshua went, Yeshua went, Abraham likely went, Muhammad likely went. It was the place of endowment, and Jacob was born there. Kedar means dark, the dark skin. Nephi is racist. He says people are dark. A son of Ishmael, the firstborn of Abraham. Now think about this. The firstborn of Abraham came to the rescue of Nephi in the desert. There's another story that says they're thirsty, and this is in Isaiah, and the people of Tema bring them food and water. Why don't we have these stories? At most, it would take 8 months to travel between those 2 points in Arabia. It took 8 years. So was there a missionary journey here? Was there some amazing Indiana Jones stories? Did they take the Ark of the Covenant with them? If you start reading Isaiah, it opens the doors to, holy cow, this is a story of stories. And Nephi's like, yeah, we went from here to here in one chapter. I think it's chapter 16. That's all we get. His dad probably pontificated on it. The arrows of Kedar. So anytime I look at Kedar and other places, I'm gravitating to Isaiah. So this was interesting. So Jeremiah 2:10, in my estimation, is Jeremiah saying two groups are going to flee. And there's another place that this is referenced. One is going to go to the Mediterranean Sea, go hop on a boat at Sidon, take a Phoenician ship, likely sail directly east, land between Myrtle Beach and Charlotte, which we call today, in a river system. The town or first city is called Mulek. Surprise, surprise. And that's the beginning of their story. We don't know what goes on until several hundred years later when they're met in Zarahemla, which is in a very different place. And then another group is going to Kedar, to the south. So we got the city being destroyed. Jeremiah's in that timeline. Jeremiah's a prophet. There's a big sign in heaven. The prophets are debating. Some of the families are tied to Egypt. Some of them are tied to the Assyrians. So there's this big brouhaha over what these signs mean and who's right and who's wrong. Jeremiah goes into hiding, writes his lamentations in Egypt. Lehi might have told him, hey, we're going to go south. The tutor or whoever was the mentor of this young boy, Mulek, who was only like 8 years old at the time, may have told Jeremiah, and they went north, and Jeremiah wrote it down. Or it may have been pure prophecy. But it's very possible that they told him. So then did Jeremiah know that Lehi, his son, took the Ark of the Covenant? How do I know? Well, if you watch a YouTube video on where did the Ark of the Covenant go and you read some of the apocryphal scriptures like Esdras, you can piece it together. And so it might be this one. So Michael Eisner, the Unseen Realm guy, is in the video, and he shares some of these scriptures that basically says there's this prophecy in the Apocrypha later that says God speaks to the prophet and says, the ark is no more. It's no longer in this land. It's taken care of. And so that some people mean, oh, it was taken to heaven. It was destroyed. What's the first thing Nephi does when he gets to America? He builds a temple. At his time, what was the purpose of the temple? To house the Ark of the Covenant. Oh, and they had seer stones to interpret this language, and they had the breastplate and the Urim and Thummim. Oh, they must have had a different set. Oh, really? Would you please read Isaiah? They covered the testimony. What does it mean to cover the testimony? If testimony means the ark, you're covering it because there's rules on how you engage with it. Now imagine you just took the Ark of the Covenant out of Jerusalem without permission. Imagine the soldiers after you. Imagine any Indiana Jones and multiply it by 10. This is a really, really cool story. And Nephi's like, yeah, we went from here to here and stuff happened. But he also says, and great are the words of Isaiah. So this may be a teaching tool for his children to motivate them to review Isaiah and say, which 10 chapters is about your daddy? And I'm just throwing out the number 10. Which of these 10 chapters are about your daddy? So that would get them to read the story and move forward with their understanding. So I've gone a little longer today. the fundamental story, Shazer as a superword, and possibly written as a word flower. Text. I've kind of introduced you to several different dictionary resources. There's an easy assignment. If you speak Spanish, this is a reasonable assignment. So this, if I read First Nephi in the Guarani, I, Nephi, having been born of goodly parents. I think there's an A in there. Marangatu. So Guarani, I think when I've been on my mission, had a little pamphlet, like a shortened version of the Book of Mormon. Now they have a full-scale Book of Mormon. But the Guarani, the current Book of Mormon in, is not the Guarani. It's the evolution of the Guarani after hundreds and hundreds of years of being mixed and confused. So if I want to understand the closest thing to what was called Old Tupi Guarani, I have to go to the oldest sources. Well, why does this matter to what we're studying? Well, there was this guy named Cologne, and he arrived in America. Colombia is the phrase for that. Likely the 2100-year prophecy of Nephi. Look up the word Bia in Hebrew, or Mbia in Guarani. The arrival of Columbus. Going back to what we said, Cologne Bu, ending with a U, would be the people associated with Colombia. So the best scholar in Guarani recently passed away. His name was Rodriguez. And he just said Mbia, Mboe, just meant thing. But I think it means more than that. I think it refers to the type of thing. And I think Mbua would be thing, that's a people. So if you're playing the great game charades, you need to know, is it a person, place, or thing to start? Why would that be important? You're creating a universal common language that people can understand, so it has to be a simple language. So if you say a word and then you say this marker, Mbia, Mboa, Mbu, you're helping simplify the communication process between two tribes that have native languages as they're nowhere near each other, but have this intermixed common language. So the first voyage of Columbia, 3 ships, or the first voyage to America, they get to a place called, by the locals, Gunahani. The N is important there versus the R. To me, the R is saying the lands of Laman, the one that wanted to be king. Ra'ah means evil in Hebrew, where Ra, like Amun Ra, means king, or mouth, or something like that. I just found Tupi. Why would Nephi be called Tupi? There's a place where Angel Falls is. The movie Up has Tupea, which are these flat mountains. And that's not where the Temple of Jehovah that Nephi built it is, but he built it on a first flat mountain. And the location is quite obvious once you dig into this. So Columbus, we say Columbus, fine, was likely Cologne or Colomb. He was likely a Jew. Nephi says, a man among the Gentiles. It could have been, he was one of us among the Gentiles. I'm pretty sure the 2100-year prophecy came about because if you look at the ancient civilizations, some of these advanced civilizations, they just all disappear. About 100 years before, so I don't know if it was specifically about 2,000 years later or specifically. 2100 minus 1492, what does that give me? 608 BC, the birth date of Jacob. Did I do that math right? Maybe. Cologne was likely an important Jewish family in Barcelona. The man Cologne, the explorer, was convincing the crown that he had converted to Christianity. He had some guy writing some Christian story of the importance of the Crusades. On his deathbed, his children were like, "Father, please tell us who we are and where we came from." And he wouldn't, because they had inherited all this land, basically the entire country, Colombia. So if you have this prophecy called Colombia, you're the conquistadores, you're going to use that against them to generate fear. So anyway, he shows up on 3 ships. His versions of the voyages are all redacted, edited. Bartolomé de las Casas is one of those editors, cleansed, removing certain things. In the Iberian Peninsula, there's only one town. I don't know if I'm spelling that right, that had the gua sound. They get to America, the gua sound is everywhere. The gua sound was related, I believe, to a Moorish or a Muslim town. The Muslims were just leaving Granada in a Battle of Granada in 1492. So the Iberians get to America. They see all these black people. They see this gua word all the time. They're like, the Muslims have been here forever. So what are they going to do? Oh, let's bring some black people over from Africa and say, we brought them all over. I'm not saying they didn't bring black people from Africa, but they were already here. There were probably already horses here, all of this stuff. They were trying to diminish what they saw, because what they saw was amazing. They couldn't comprehend it. Anyway, the first voyage, some made-up story. You have Columbus on one ship, 2 brothers on the other 2 ships. One of the brothers takes off to go to a bunch of islands and to fornicate with women, and he gets back to the Iberian Peninsula and dies of some sexual disease shortly thereafter. They get into some naval maritime engagement with the locals on this island of Guanají, which is this weird island that if you don't know how to go into port, there are these shoals or these coral that you'll get caught up into. Columbus, the captain of his ship, got caught up in those. There was probably a battle that ensued. People probably died, but he told the story that our ship got lost, so we took the wood and built a fort and left them there. The second voyage is useful because there was a doctor there, and he's writing his story, and that hasn't been redacted. So you can kind of get a sense for what happened the first time. Columbus has 75 men and 3 ships. He returns within 6 months with 1,500 men and 75 ships. 75 is interesting that the story has that in both sides. Oh, I'm supposed to believe what I was taught about Columbus. No, you're not. So then the question goes to those that are actual scholars, is why did Nephi not say his name? As a teaching tool, if that's what the purpose of these small plates were, the fill in the blank, especially with something as important as when Columbus comes, there's going to be destruction like you've never seen before. They're going to rape your women, kill all your people, enslave you. It's going to be bad. But what does Nephi say? In the version we have, he's inspired by the God to come to America. Is that Nephi talking, or is that Joseph Smith talking? So there's the rub. If we're to examine any translation process, we have to be able to say it's very likely that any human involved is going to create scribal errors. So in traditional Mormon constructed truth systems, we have the Articles of Faith. The Bible is only as true because there's scribal error, but there's no possible scribal error in the Book of Mormon. It went through the hands of man. That's ridiculous. Scribal errors occur. It's just a thing. Now, if there was an actual 2100 year prophecy to the day, like 2,100 years from the time we left Jerusalem, so we left and then someone's going to come. Do you see the bookends there? And Joseph voices that. So he hears that, he voices that, and David Whitmer, or the Whitmer brothers, or Hiram Page, or Oliver's like, Joseph, we can't include that. Everyone knows the Columbus story. So maybe they minimized it because they thought it was too obvious of a prophecy. Now think about that. So anyway, Columbia happens. By that I mean Cologne arrives in America. A bunch of information is going back to Europe. There's a bunch of wood carvings. The Medici family in Italy collects a bunch of them, but supposedly they get destroyed in fire. Then all of a sudden Galileo is really smart, Da Vinci is really smart, and the Renaissance begins. Oh, they just got smart out of the tip of a hat and out of all the gold they stole. No, there was knowledge and information that they gleaned on their voyages that generated the Renaissance. And then it takes them a long time to get to the heart of Africa, Timbuktu, the Niger River, and then all of a sudden they get really smart with the higher mathematics. So, where was I going with all that? The first voyage occurs, they take some of them take sex slaves, but they were able within 6 months' time to take those people, go to Spain, communicate with them, learn, cross-translate so they can communicate, come back and use them as guides. The doctor, when he comes back on the second voyage, explains you would see a tribe that just lived in the jungle and didn't know what a boat was. And he said you would see tribes that clearly knew about boats. And it seemed like there was an overarching language called Tupi, Old Tupi, and if you're a conquistador, what are you going to do? You're going to replace that language with yours. Or did Spanish get significantly altered by the Tupi language? Agua would be an example. Latin, the word for water is aqua with a k sound. In an old map, so we'll eventually get to these, the old maps, the Dora solution. Is it Paraguay or Paraguay? So there's an old map from that time, and one of those was the vulgar language in the map. So this is the David Ramsey's, Rumser, however you say that, and the John Carter Brown collections. The maps. How do you say brother and sister in Spanish or Latin? Fraternidad, sororidad, fraternity, sorority, university. Hermano, hermana, very likely a Mayan or a simplified distinction of the word Mormon, but a male or a female Mormon. Anyone could call anyone else, hello, hola, hermano. Because if you believed in God's good love, you were brothers. Oh, you're just making that up. Am I? So the connection is Old Tupi is tied to the Arawak language, is tied to the Algonquin language, is obviously tied to the Guarani language, and as we start to develop a geography model, you need to understand how that language initially was created, where did it come from, and how it diffused along river systems, and how there was a distinct disconnect between one language and the other, that in all the models that they try to generate, they get confused because they can't build into the model that one village is changing sides between God and not, or one group intentionally decides to leave another group. So this is the primary starting data point right here. Dark purple tells you where the center is of the 2P language. Let's get rid of the word old. And then they build, it might be the Tupinambra model. There it is. So then they build these models where this is where it seemed to start, and then it spread out all over here. But that model doesn't have where it started is the land of Nephi after he left his brothers. So one of these scribbles would have been where his brothers were. But this is very useful to connect research with a basic construct of how Nephi would have actually been a person, actual historicity. And so, as we move forward, I am of the B.H. Roberts camp. He was presenting some ideas to Talmage. He had already had a run-in with the leadership about loyalty to the Brigham Way. He was a Democrat. He was the first church historian. He had access to every original document of Joseph Smith. Some of those documents probably are in a vault somewhere or mysteriously accidentally burned at that era when they were talking about some of these things. Talmage came up with the polemic worldview, which is flawed logic, which is, if the Book of Mormon is true, Joseph Smith is a prophet, therefore the church is true. Those things are all independent. Joseph Smith was a prophet at times. At times he was a man. At times he was deceived. Just because someone's a prophet doesn't make them omniscient and perfect. And in Mormonism, we just fall into the literal trap. Read 2 Nephi chapter 2, Lehi, talking about Adam fell that men might be and men might have joy. Go up a few verses. He emphasizes that he's speculating based on what he's read and his current worldview. But he's a prophet, so everything he said must be true. He must have known all things because he talked to God once. Where does that logical connection come from? It's ridiculous. The Book of Mormon had to have been sourced from somewhere. That is true. Joseph Smith had to somehow come up with those words, a translation process, which required some sort of spiritual connection. So B.H. didn't want to go down this polemics path. James Talmage introduced it. B.H. had read all the history, and he's like, we should be like the other churches, that we have our own beliefs, we have our own culture, but we don't try to push polemics. One is right, therefore the other is wrong. And if you look at the timeline, maybe one of the reasons the Second Coming's been delayed so much is because we've created the polemics. Like, we've exercised our agency to do a certain thing, which has delayed the inevitable, but that's the nature of agency. God gives us our agency, so the timeline's pushed back because of our choices. So the other thing Brigham or B.H. Roberts said is that eventually you can triangulate data and you will have a historicity proof of the Book of Mormon, which I would say is the Book of Mormon and the Legend of Nephi, two different records, but that's splitting hairs. But think about where that logic leads. They're still struggling with the historicity of Old Testament characters, in the basic Judeo-Christian community. They recently found some prayer roll that had the word Jehovah on it, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. But what happens if we can prove the historicity of Nephi, and Nephi says he came from this other place? The cards of logic will tumble. So what? It doesn't matter. I'm right, you're wrong. That doesn't get us to a place. That's not why we're studying Nephi. Nephi built Jerusalem or Zion, and when I say that, I mean it in the lowercase original Hebrew form before it got equated with a specific place, just like Elijah in Malachi might not have been specifically in Elijah, but El and Jehovah in one word. Or if I switched the order, it would be Joel, or the female version, Yael, Jehovah, and then El. The first shall be last, the last shall be first. So when you think about language and you're going back to original ancient Egyptian or Hebrew language, you need to get out of the philosophies of men and get into concrete understandings. And you need to understand the chiasmus phase, but today I'm introducing the sunflower phase. So then I need to map 2P to Egyptian. And I'm not the first one to do this. When they first got to the Americas, there were people suggesting in academia that the old Guarani 2P languages were Egyptian. But that wasn't the commonly accepted norm in academia, so that was dismissed. So think about how academia determines what's true or not. It's a social construct of a certain group of people. There's nothing scientific about it. That's why it's called the social sciences. It's made up sciences. Albert Einstein was a scientist. He would create thought experiments, and they would create testable ways to demonstrate those. And he eventually won a Nobel Prize for it. He couldn't get a job at university beforehand because he was an outlier. But afterwards, everyone wanted to give him a job. His first experiment failed. They put mirrors on the moon, did some experiment. It failed. The second one, they improved their precision, and it demonstrated the theory of general relativity, which started out as a thought experiment, and he developed a testable hypothesis. So the 2P language is tied to the ancient Egyptian language. We're going to find out that 2P, I think it's called Teupi, are a class of mountains, like in the movie Up. It's this flat. So I've been trying to find this in the dictionary, and just the other day I found this, which is my best connection to it, because that is where, when I get into the geography, the Temple of Jehovah that Nephi builded is found. So what? We've talked about Shazer, we've talked about Lai. We're trying to get an understanding of how their language works, how their logic works, but we're unafraid to consider that there were scribal introjections. I can walk and chew gum. Joseph Smith could have heard a voice from heaven, wrote down some words, talked to a bunch of guys, made some tweaks to those words based on what they thought would be accepted and adopted into their community. That sounds as normal as life itself. This is how men operate. I'm not going to go out on some limb and say, well, it literally says this. Did Joseph hear it wrong? Was it written down wrong? Did they intentionally understand it one way when it was intended in another way? Whether intentional or ignorant. So this Columbus one is a good example. So let's say Nephi said, literally, there is a Jew among the Gentiles that will come exactly 2,100 years after we left Jerusalem, and his name will be Cologne. And his coming, Colombia, will be great destruction. 1820s America. I don't know this, but what can we find from the record of that time of the traditional worldview of America and Columbus's discovery in that era, in that genre? Because what we have is it was inspired by God and this and that and the other, which really sounds like the same propaganda that, Noel would propagate about the creation of this country and the Constitution. But Joseph had a lot of run-ins with the government from a young age. I don't know that he had this American exceptionalism worldview that we have proposed or put upon him in our modern lens. Maybe he did. Good scholars that dig into what was actually going on into the life of Joseph, what other people were talking about, what was the current culture at that time, is welcome. There's lots of historians that I've admired for their quality of work, regardless of where they fall on the apologetic or anti-scale. I'm searching for truth, wherever it takes me. Okay, dear readers, dear friends. Today's lesson was Shazer as a superword and possibly written as a word flower. The primary meaning is the garden of birth. And that is where I will leave that. May God bless and keep you. Shalom.